Students, I want to talk a little bit about Chapter 3 and your discussion board responses were excellent. And most of you did a good job of doing a little research to support your thoughts on the funding issues in Nebraska. Looked a little bit at TIOSA, and we'll get more into it later in this course. But as we see the results of TIOSA, part of that, I don't really have a problem with TIOSA. What I have a problem with is the size of the pie that the formula in TIOSA divides. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. Some of you mentioned a sales tax or increased income tax, and I think we're going to have some issues probably with senators in the urban areas supporting higher taxes with the climate the way it is now. And I know one of you mentioned that the population center of the state was 84th Street in Lincoln. And I remember a few years ago when they used to say Seward was the population center of Nebraska, but it keeps moving east, and especially in the Omaha metro area. We talked about TIF. Some of you suggested doing away with some of the tax write-offs that businesses have. The problem with that is you have to understand Nebraska is in competition with other states, and in addressing that, if you take some of those incentives away, you're going to lose jobs because you're going to lose companies that will move out of the state. Most TIF, I think, can be from 5 to 15 years. But in the long run, some of those are probably beneficial. One of the issues we're seeing now, of course, is lower ag valuations, and corn prices have dropped, and so farmers are really feeling a pinch, and I think that's the real deal. One suggestion was an internet tax, and I think that already is somewhat happening. I think Amazon is paying Nebraska some tax money for expenditures from Nebraskans. And so there's a lot of ideas, but one of my wife's uncles was a finance instructor at San Diego State, and I was telling him years ago that we were trying to get more involved with sales and income tax, and his statement was, I wouldn't go away from property tax. He says it's the most stable tax that there is. Somebody's going to pay those taxes, but rural superintendents are really under pressure from the taxpayers in those areas. One of the superintendents from a school that I know pretty well made the statement that his 5 top supporters of the school were also the 5 biggest contributors as far as property tax. And he said they want to support the school, but they just don't think the tax is fair. And I think that's really the thought in rural Nebraska. Many places look to cuts, and it's easy for Joe Citizen to think, well, you ought to be able to make some of those cuts and make it work. And we at the university are starting to feel that much more than 2 or 3 years ago. There was some talk about consolidation, and they used to always say there were small schools by necessity, and then there were schools by choice, small schools by choice. And you look at a Thedford where students are traveling 35 miles to come to class. That's a small school by necessity. Now, there are other schools that are small by choice, where they're maybe 7 miles away from another school where it could be, and I can think of several situations. Those are schools that are small by choice, and in all honesty, they're paying the bill. I mean, if they're willing to support that, but there are a lot of places where they're not very supportive. Some of you had some good ideas. Gambling, of course, and a casino tax was one that came up. And I once talked to, well, a year ago, I talked to our state senator about it. And I said, what's the possibility of having a bill that would authorize building a casino within 1 mile of any state that has gambling? Well, that's every state around us. You know, the concern is that gambling will increase, and every small town will have a slot machines, or they'll have a casino. My thought was it probably wouldn't increase gambling very much, because those people that are going to gamble are going to Iowa. So if you took what is now the ConAgra site and build a casino there, I think you'd break the Iowa casinos, because we're, as one of you mentioned, when you cross the river and you go to the casino, you're seeing all Nebraska cars, or 70% of Nebraska cars. We had a discussion in a coffee group that I had not too long ago, because they were talking about all the income that Colorado's getting from gambling and also from marijuana sales. The question came up, would we support that? And which would you support if you're going to choose one or the other? I personally wouldn't choose marijuana as a choice, and I don't think many Nebraskans would, but I may be wrong. Anyway, I thought you had some good ideas. I do want to mention that we're moving along fairly well, and I hope to schedule. I think I have a Zoom meeting scheduled here in early March, and we can talk about some of these issues that we find. We also have your position papers due in a couple weeks, and at the end of chapter 4, we'll have a unit quiz, which you'll be able to take more than once if you have issues with it. But we have to do some calculation problems that we want you have some experience in considering. So I'll look forward to chatting with you again sometime. Please excuse the casual attire. My wife has she ruptured a tendon in her ankle, and so guess who's getting to do all the housework. So anyway, we'll talk to you later.